Hello. I'm Casey.
And I'm Fallon.
And this is
Render the Darkness.
Okay. We are back for part 2 of the Nancy Pfister case.
What, dude?
We are still in Colorado for this one. We left you last time. We had done some character development. We had talked a little bit about Nancy and her parents and her life growing up, and a little bit about her relationship with her sisters. And we talked a little bit about her best friend, Kathy Carpenter. And we talked a little bit about Trey and Nancy Styler and how they became a part and or involved with Nancy Pfister. So, that being said, we're going to give you the fun fact for this episode, and then we're going to pick right up where we left off. Fun fact for this episode is that snails breathe through their foot.
Their foot?
Yeah, because they only have that one solid, little, thing.
Sluggy tummy.
Yeah.
Sluggy tummy.
So their foot.
Yeah. Did not know that. I always thought they breathed through the little... They come out slow and they're going...
Uh-huh. That's hilarious. Okay, so again, just to remind us where we left off, I had just discussed the phone call between Nancy Styler and Nancy Pfister and how well it had gone, with her mentioning the greenhouse and all that, and Nancy inviting them to come over. Which that was kind of, and again, I'm going to refer to Nancy Pfister as Pfister, and I will refer to Nancy Styler as Styler, and if I'm talking about Trey, I will say Trey. So that was kind of Pfister's way to, she would start off energetic and warm and inviting and friendly, but it never really lasted for very long. Eventually, she would get drunk or high, and her disposition would change. But there's no way the Stylers could have known that, obviously, because they didn't know her.
So she wasn't a happy drunk.
I'm not sure it's that she wasn't a happy drunk per se. I think she was just like a dramatic drunk.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep. I've known some of them.
Yeah. There was one slight problem for the Stylers upon their first sight of Pfister's house. By this point, Trey was supposedly in a wheelchair most of the time, and the only way to get in the house was up some stairs, and the same was true for the master bedroom, which Nancy was offering for the couple to stay in.
Okay.
When it came to officializing the terms of them renting the house, Pfister relied only on verbal agreement rather than a written contract, which, as someone who watches Judge Judy literally every day, she can verify. Every day I watch Judge Judy. You should always write your contracts down in detail and have all the parties involved sign it.
Sign and date it. Always.
Pfister did it this way for a reason, though. So we'll find out. It's kind of the same reason that she wanted all of her payments in cash, so her parents' lawyers couldn't track how much money she did or didn't have.
Okay.
She did it that way so she could change the terms of the agreement whenever she wanted. But again, the Stylers had no way to know that.
Right.
They trusted her right off the rip because that was the image she put off. That was the vibe she put off. Like, she was warm, she was welcoming, she was trusting. We'll see how long that lasts.
I'm going to say not very long.
So let's go over some of the terms that they would ultimately agree to. Some of the terms of the rental were that Pfister wanted $4,000 a month. She also stipulated that she wanted first month rent, last month rent, and a security deposit of equal value, so the Stylers would need $12,000 to move in.
Golly.
Which, okay, the amount is high. I don't know if the amount is high for Aspen, Colorado in that time. I don't know what the average rent for that area was, but I do think, and if I have anybody who is like a landlord or has dealt with this before, I do think it's pretty common for them to ask for the first and the last in the deposit. I think that's a pretty standard thing to ask for.
Again, what's the year this was?
This was, by this point, we were in the early 2000s.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so yeah, it probably is kind of pricey to be living in Aspen.
Yeah, I think we're in 2013 by this point, if I'm not mistaken. So another term was that they had to pay the utilities as well for the house while she was gone.
Okay.
And lastly, which this one seems to actually be ultimately the biggest problem, she included Pfister. This one seemed more like a personal favor rather than like a tenant term, but she wanted them to watch her dog from Monday through Thursday and told them that her friend Kathy would pick him up on Fridays and keep him over the weekends.
Doesn't look a bad.
Well, Trey was a bit hesitant about the dog, but Nancy Styler kind of overrode him on that and agreed to all of Pfister's terms.
Okay.
So I feel like it's important to add a little bit about Pfister's dog, who was a Labradoodle named Gabe,
Aww.
who was extremely undisciplined.
Uh-oh.
Like, to the point that when Nancy tried to hire someone to train him, after spending a short amount of time with the dog, the trainer actually refused to take him as a client.
Ooh.
That's how undisciplined this dog was. There may have been a slight delusion between the Stylers and Pfister right off the bat. Pfister loved to put off that image of great wealth, even though she really didn't have any of her own money, or at least if she did, it was very little. I will say, though, that even though the Stylers really didn't know anything about Pfister, the same could be said about her. She didn't know anything about the Stylers or any of their past legal troubles.
Okay. Yeah.
So right off the bat, we're starting off with a little bit of a rocky footing.
Dishonest.
But at this point, neither one of them know that yet. So, according to the Stylers, from what I read, Nancy initially offered for them to stay a month free in the home. But they couldn't do that because all of their stuff was still in Denver. However, they did start moving some of their stuff in. And among that stuff was Styler's 5 massive sewing machines and all of her spa equipment. Which I think I read that her spa equipment accumulated to like a value of like $100,000.
Ooh.
So she had a lot of it.
Wow.
They ended up giving Pfister half of what they owed to solidify the agreement. So they gave her the $6,000, and according to them, this was the moment that everything changed.
Ooh.
According to them, Pfister was no longer being friendly, warm, or welcoming. She became demanding, temperamental, and demeaning. She began demanding them to do belittling things like rubbing her shoulders, her neck, her back, demanding them to go make her drinks and to go get her this and go get her that. And Nancy Styler would later say that Pfister acted like they were more of her servants rather than potential tenants. To those who knew Pfister, this wasn't uncommon behavior. They had grown to expect it. But the Stylers and Pfister were perfect strangers, so to them, this was bizarre. This change seemed erratic, off-putting, and concerning to the Stylers. This was an unfathomable. Why did I put that word in there? This was an unusual way for Nancy Styler to be treated. I've never found a word I couldn't say. Unfathomable. There we go.
Hey,
yeah. Anyway, sure, the Stylers had hit a rough patch over the last few years prior to moving in with Pfister, but at one point, they lived in a nicer, bigger house than Pfister had. They had more money than it seemed like Pfister had, and the hope of being in Aspen was to get back on top, so being treated this way was unacceptable to Nancy Styler. But Trey convinced her to hang in there. He reminded her that Pfister was supposed to leave for Australia soon, so they thought once that happened, they'd be able to settle in, relax, and start focusing on their business venture.
Hmm.
That could not have been further from the truth of what would actually happen, as they would come to learn.
Okay.
The first major financial issue between Pfister and the Stylers was when Pfister was gearing up for her going away party before she left for Australia. She hired some people to come in and clean the house and started telling the Stylers they were responsible for half the cleaning bill. She also told them they would be responsible for buying the alcohol she wanted to use for the party, and that hit at a bill of $1,000.
Wow.
By the time this happened, the Stylers still hadn't physically moved into the house yet, so this request seemed highly outlandish to them.
Yeah, I'm on their side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a
Yeah,
no.
it's a bit strange, but this is, it's how Pfister was. It was her way. It's how she had done everybody her whole life and gotten away with it, so it didn't, she didn't see any reason why she wouldn't get away with it this time. The next issue that arose was the issues within the house. For example, there was no working dishwasher. There was no ice machine because Pfister had shut the ice maker down. And Pfeister's drinking was beginning to become a major red flag that, coupled with Pfeister's demands, were causing the Stylers to second guess if they even wanted to live there.
Don't blame them.
But they had already given her half the money, and despite their reservations, they had assumed that if they just went ahead and paid for the cleaners and paid for the alcohol, Pfister would surely deduct that cost from the $6,000 they still hadn't given her.
I bet you don't.
But again, they would be wrong, and you would be right. They didn't know that yet. Even worse, they paid the housekeeper, who, according to Styler, did a terrible job, so Styler had to come clean the entire house prior to the party again. So she not only had to pay for somebody to clean the house, she still ended up cleaning the house herself. And she wasn't even living there yet.
Nope.
By this point, the only peace of mind the Stylers had was that it was Pfister's last week before she was going to leave for Australia. In fact, the party was on the 16th of November 2013, and Pfister was supposed to leave on November 22nd. Finally, after 2 weeks of the couple dealing with Nancy's outrageous behavior, according to them, it was time for Pfister to go to the airport, and Pfister started demanding they take her there. Stylers would give her a ride, and according to them, she was so high on pills that she had to be taken to the gate in a wheelchair.
Oh my gosh.
Finally, the Stylers could officially take a breath and get settled into the house, but being in Australia did not stop Pfister from causing trouble. Pfister began accusing Nancy Styler of owing money for clothes Styler had charged on her credit cards. Styler denied owing her any money for this. After this, the hot water heater in the house broke, and Pfister wouldn't voluntarily fix it, so the Stylers would hire a handyman to come in and fix it, and they had gone through Pfister's trust to get the money so they could pay for it. And on top of that, Pfister began demanding the full payment of the $6,000 she claimed they still owed her. They didn't agree they still owed her this much, and Pfister began threatening to hire a lawyer and telling the couple to move out. By December, so just a few weeks after Pfister left, her lawyer, John Beatty, told the Stylers they had 3 days to pay what they owed, the $6,000 plus the $670 that Pfister was accusing Styler of charging to her credit cards, and the utilities. And if they didn't, he would begin the eviction process.
I think I'd just leave.
Well, a week or so later, the Stylers would pay the $6,000 they owed, plus their utility payment, and assumed all was settled and fixed. In their minds, they had met the terms and were okay for now. However, Pfister didn't feel that way. She told the couple they needed to find somewhere else to stay. By this point...
So they paid $12,000, utility...
And they paid for the drinks, and they paid for the housekeeper, and they hadn't even been there for a few weeks yet. Like, they physically in the house. They didn't move physically into the house until November 22nd.
And she's telling them to leave.
Yeah, she's telling them to get out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So by this point, as you can imagine, the Pfeisters were angry.
Yeah.
But Pfister was angry. The Stylers were angry, and the situation was getting worse and worse for the Stylers. This all snowballed within less than 2 months. Like this whole case snowballed within less than 2 months from the time that the Stylers and Pfister actually met each other. Okay, so this cued the Stylers to contact Pfeister's lawyer requesting a drawn-up contract with the exact terms of Pfeister's expectations so it would be in writing and reconfirming that they had met the terms of the original agreement and hadn't actually moved into the home until November 22nd. In response, Pfister called her trusted friend Kathy and began lying about when the Stylers physically took possession of the home. She told Kathy they had been in the house since October and hadn't paid rent and were running up the light bill with all of Styler's fancy spa equipment since and still owed the money on her credit card.
Oh, wow.
Telling Kathy this seemingly wasn't enough. She also took to social media to complain about her tenants. She began slandering them in emails and text messages, which, with Pfeister's connections, in the Stylers' mind, was completely destroying any chance they would ever have of building a business in Aspen. In their mind, she was threatening their dreams, their hopes, and their livelihood, which, I mean, she really was.
Yeah.
She really was. By January 7th, while the Stylers were still in the house, Pfister took to social media again to put out an ad that she was looking for a new tenant. She also began actively seeking out information on how to begin the eviction process. By January 16, 2014, Trey reached out to Pfeister's lawyer again to ensure him they were going to pay her January rent and they didn't even actually have a lease. He also assured Beatty that there was no need for any further legal action. While the couple were in the house, they did begin to create a really good relationship with Kathy Carpenter, which was Pfeister's best friend. I've mentioned her several times throughout the case. They interacted with her on a weekly basis because she was coming to get Gabe on the weekend.
Yeah.
So they had the opportunity to kind of bond and build a little bit of a trust with her. They started inviting her into the home, and there was even an incident when Kathy began choking or like having a hard time breathing or something, and Trey, who used to be a doctor, gave her some medicine that helped her. So she kind of developed this mindset that she owed the Styler something because of that.
Yeah.
But she had also been friends with Nancy for years, so she felt like she owed her a certain level of loyalty as well. One day, while in Pfeister's home, Kathy noticed that Trey was going into Pfeister's closet, which Kathy knew Pfeister had locked before she left. She also noticed that Trey had his laptop hooked up to Pfeister's laptop as if he was transferring something.
Uh-oh.
And he also began asking Kathy, who, if you remember, worked as Pfeister's bank teller and was Pfeister's personal teller and her personal financial person outside of the lawyer, he began asking her questions about Pfeister's financial situation. This made Kathy pretty uncomfortable, so she would contact Pfister and relay this information, and she would recommend to Pfister that she change her passwords as well as the locks on her closet door. Pfister would agree and ask Kathy to have the lock on the closet changed and to just go ahead and remove the laptop from the house altogether. On January 21st, 2014, Pfister would again take to reaching out to her social media circle in pursuit of a new tenant, claiming her current ones would be out no later than February 22nd. Pfister also began making plans to come home early. By this time, the Stylers were furious. February 17th was the date on the next letter that Trey wrote to Pfister, telling Pfister she was lying about the credit card money not being paid back, and in fact, Pfister owed them money. Pfister was enraged by this letter and informed the couple that she was on her way back and demanded the Stylers not be there. On February 18th, Kathy would inform the Stylers that they had 4 days until Pfister would be home. This threw the couple into panic mode. Trey would go to Kathy's bank and ask for a loan. He wanted enough to afford the first and last month rent, plus deposit on somewhere else to rent, plus a little to get them on their feet. I think I read he was asking for between $25,000 to $50,000 to get this loan, Trey was actually talking to a man named Scott Gordon, who at the time was the branch manager. During the course of their conversation, Trey kind of began venting to Gordon about Pfister and made comments implying that if anything happened to Pfister, it would be for the best.
Oh no.
Well, let's keep in mind he's also at her bank and her family's bank and the bank that they've always used, so these people know her very well.
Yeah, that one, yeah.
Obviously, his application for the loan was denied, and it said that Trey had also told Gordon that he was considering another option, which was unaliving himself. He made comments about this before, suggesting he'd be worth more to his wife dead than alive.
Oh, that's sad.
Trey was desperate. He even went so far as to reach out to old colleagues from the CAC for a loan, who obviously said no, given their history, but that just shows like how desperate Trey was. By February 19th, 2014, Pfister began telling the couple to get all of their stuff and themselves out of her house. She would be home in the next 3 days. They desperately began trying to meet Pfister's impossible demand. They were able to get a room at the Aspen Lodge and obtain a storage room and a moving van. Trey went so far as to try to pawn a ring he had bought for his wife, but the jeweler wasn't offering anywhere near what Trey thought the ring was worth. And again, Trey contemplated unaliving himself with the life insurance policy, but picked himself up and moved forward. On February 22nd, 2014, Pfister was on her way home. She told the Stylers at this point if they needed more time, they could pay for her to stay at a hotel and pay for her meals and whatever drinks she wanted. But the specific hotel Pfister was demanding to stay in was $900 a night.
Golly.
So the Pfisters said no. This caused Pfister to flip back to demanding them out of the house, and for them to get a hotel if they needed, she didn't care. The next thing Kathy claimed to have happened was, or should have been, quite the red flag. That was Trey calling Kathy and insisting that he be the one to pick Pfister up from the airport. Kathy did not think that was a good idea. She insisted that he did not go to the airport, but he was adamant about it. According to Kathy, when she asked why he wanted to so badly, Nancy Styler chimed in and said, because she needs to disappear forever. This is just a horrible woman. I never wanted to kill anyone like I want to kill her. End quote.
Oh, wow, she straight up told her that?
According to Kathy, those were her exact words. There's supposed to be a start quote in front of the because on that sentence. But I did end a quote.
Yes.
But according to Kathy, those were Styler's exact words. According to Kathy, in hindsight, she should have called the cops, but opted not to, dismissing it as them just expressing frustrations because they were angry. Let me just say this. If someone says something that specific and directed, that's not a figure of speech or them blowing off steam. Like, they're thinking of something. Like, they're planning something.
For sure.
They've already thought it out.
I mean, if he's wanting to, like, pick her up so badly, and she's all like, yeah, because she doesn't need to be here anymore, and it's like,
yeah, that's not an angry, like, that's not something people say normally just out of anger.
No.
Like, that was anger attached to a plan.
Yeah.
Once Kathy was able to tell Pfister the Stylers were demanding to be the ones to pick her up, Pfister said she did not want to see them. And by the time it was said done, Trey receded and Kathy picked up Pfister.
Good.
Nancy Styler would contact Kathy later that night to confirm that whether or not Pfister was in fact home.
Mm-hmm.
Pfister was able to talk Kathy into staying the night, which was probably a good thing. Kathy would leave the following day to go to one of her AA meetings, and the Stylers would show up to get some of their stuff from downstairs while Pfister slept upstairs. At some point, Pfister woke up and contacted her lawyer to ask about getting a restraining order in lieu of the $6,100 she claimed they owed her. After her meeting, Kathy met with Trey to exchange vehicles, which they had previously traded because Kathy's vehicle was bigger, so the Stylers were borrowing it to help them move some of their stuff out. Okay. Once Trey and Kathy met up, Kathy gave Trey a letter from Pfister demanding $4,000 immediately, so she could hire someone to come in and get her house back in order, and she also believed that they had broken her bed, so she was demanding they buy her a new bed as well.
Oh my
She
gosh.
put in the letter that the couple owed her an accumulated debt of $14,000 and that they could not retrieve the rest of their stuff until she got her money. This really pushed the situation over the edge. In Trey's mind, they were doing their best to meet Pfister's already unrealistic demands, and now she was refusing to let them just end this nightmare by getting their stuff and leaving. Now she's holding their stuff hostage, which were the things that were left in the house, the spa equipment, the sewing machines, the stuff like that. Like, those are the only things left in the world that his wife held any kind of value to, and it was enhancing their already extremely stressful situation. At this point, in response, Trey threatened to sue her. According to Trey, Nancy Styler was already in a deep state of depression over the whole situation, and he knew this note from Pfister would make it worse. Seeing his wife in this broken state caused Trey to start racking his brain to find any way possible to help relieve her stress any way he could. By the time Trey made it back to his wife, Kathy had made it back to Pfister, who gave Kathy her credit card and sent her to get groceries. Once she returned, Pfister would convince Kathy to stay one more night. Kathy would agree, but she would also remind Pfister that she had to go to work the following morning, and she did just that. She got up the next day, made sure the dog had food and water, and that Pfister's breakfast was ready, and she headed off to work.
She made her breakfast?
She made her breakfast.
Wow. Golly.
By Tuesday, the Stylers were continuing to go in and out of Pfister's house, moving their things, according to them. It's also noted that they did request for an officer to come with them to ensure Pfister let them retrieve their things because they had reached out to a lawyer by this point, and according to them, the lawyer had told them that Pfister had no legal right to hold their stuff, so they asked for a police escort.
Okay.
They would get a cop to come out, sort of. The sheriff's department thought it would be less disruptive if they weren't physically on the property, but rather down the road. So if they needed to come, they could get there within a couple of minutes.
Okay.
See, the cops knew Nancy Pfister, and they knew she was prone to erratic and sometimes unpredictable behavior.
Okay.
So this genuinely did seem like their best approach to an already sensitive situation, like a feud between Pfister and the Stylers.
Yeah.
This is when things started to get bizarre. The Stylers began calling Kathy to let her know that Pfister wasn't home Tuesday when they went to get their things. Nancy also claimed that Gabe had soiled the house as to suggest that no one had let him out.
The day that she went to work, that she fed the dog?
No, she went to work on Monday.
Oh, on Monday, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This is Tuesday.
Okay.
She also, according to Kathy, asked a very strange question. Kathy said Styler had asked her if she thought Pfister might have gone off somewhere and unalived herself. Another strange thing that happened on Tuesday was Pfister's friend Patrick Carney had stopped by. He claimed that he was supposed to pick Pfister up on Monday, but had suffered a skiing injury that day, so he wasn't there or wasn't able to pick her up until Tuesday. Okay. But after looking for her briefly, with Nancy Styler fast on his heels with every step he took, he left. Okay. Rolling over to Wednesday. The Stylers would go back to Pfister's to grab the rest of their stuff, and again Nancy Styler would call Kathy and again claim Pfister was gone and the dog had relieved himself throughout the house. She also made sure to add that upon looking in Pfister's bedroom, she didn't see her, and an even stranger thing to mention is that there were no sheets on her bed. Kathy thought it was extremely strange to mention that detail about the sheets, and by this point, Kathy hadn't heard from Pfister in a couple days, so that combined with the strange things the Stylers were saying, she was getting extremely worried about her friend. Yep. That night, after the Stylers had called to tell Kathy that they had left for a while, she went to Pfister's house to look for Nancy herself and to get her dog. One of the first things she noticed was the smell in the house. She couldn't describe it, but something smelled really bad.
Oh no.
She then noticed that Pfister, who drank daily, hadn't drank any of the bottles of champagne that Kathy had bought for her on Monday. The next strange, actually it's Sunday. I think she bought when she went grocery shopping Sunday.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next strange thing she noticed was that the key for the closet in Pfister's room wasn't where Kathy had put it 2 days prior when she left it for Pfister. Remember, she had had the locks changed while Pfister was in Australia, and she had 2 copies of the key made, one of which she had given to Pfister when Pfister had gotten home.
Okay.
The key she gave Pfister was left in the lock of the closet, but was no longer there. This prompted Kathy to get her key and to look in the closet. When she opened the door, she was almost knocked down from the smell, and when she was able to actually look in there, she immediately noticed white sheets in the floor that appeared to be bundled around something. Kathy knew instantly what she had just found in the closet, and it was Nancy Pfister.
Oh.
Kathy fled the house and called 911, and the dispatcher told her to stop driving wherever she was and stay until the cops got to the house. They would need her statement. She continued to try to leave, which the dispatcher found odd, but Kathy did end up staying where she did end up parking and staying where she was at. And Kathy wasted no time in telling the dispatcher what and who she'd just found, and she was pretty sure she already knew who had done it.
Yeah.
The police immediately responded, and they quickly determined that someone had used an axe and a hammer to murder Pfister. Her abdomen was sliced open, and her head was beaten in.
Oh.
Her cause of death was blunt force trauma, as well as, and I hope I say this word right, exsanguination, which really just means the loss of blood, basically.
Oh, so she bled to death?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
They also determined that she must have been attacked while she was sleeping because she showed 0 signs of trying to defend herself at all.
Oh.
It didn't take long for the police to figure out who the killers were. Pfister's body was discovered on February 26, 2014, and by March 3rd, the Stylers were arrested.
Good.
The investigators had more than enough evidence against them, especially since a few days earlier, a city worker found Pfister's pills, the hammer still covered in blood, and the Stylers' vehicle registration in a trash bin all together. And sloppily enough, what trash bin was this evidence found in?
Police station.
The one located directly behind the Stylers Motel.
Oh. So they put their registration in the same
with her
bag.
pills and the hammer. I don't know.
Okay.
I guess they were hoping that the trash would get dumped before anybody looked in it. I don't know.
I mean, that's pretty stupid. I mean, I'm glad.
That's why I said sloppily enough.
Yeah. Okay.
The police weren't done just yet. They had the Stylers, but they believed they had help. They believed that Kathy Carpenter played a role in the murder as well.
Really?
Mostly based on her suspicious behavior and her responses during the 911 call. So they said there was at least 31 different guilty responses made by Carpenter during her 911 call, or incriminating, that made it seem like she wasn't being totally honest about something. Anyways, so 3 weeks after the Stylers were arrested for first-degree murder, Kathy was arrested as well.
Oh, no.
Now, Trey Styler would go on to cut a deal. His confession and a guilty plea in exchange for his wife and Kathy Carpenter to be released.
Oh, wow, okay.
They agreed, and Nancy and Kathy were free to go, and Trey would go on to confess that he committed the murder completely alone, even though the investigators knew there was no way that could be true, given his physical condition.
Yeah.
They accepted the confession, and Trey would be found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, but that was later reduced to 20 years. And in 2015, Trey unalived himself in his cell in Cannon City, Colorado. As for Nancy and Kathy, Kathy would go on to join forces with Juliana, remember Nancy Pfister's daughter, to get the city of Aspen to add Nancy Pfister's name to the city's memorial shrine that remembers and honors people from Colorado as well as Aspen residents who have passed, and the city would go on to add her name in 2016. As for Nancy Styler, in 2015, she would go on to write a book titled Guilt by Matrimony, a memoir of love, madness, and the murder of Nancy Pfister, which was clearly ill-received and thought to be extremely distasteful. I will not be attaching a link in the show notes for this one, and please let me be very clear, I did not use this book as a resource for this case.
Good, good.
I did, however, read it, and although Pfister had her faults, I thought this book to be highly slanderous and disrespectful in regards to speaking of Pfister and her character, especially being written not only by the accused murderer's spouse, but also being written by a woman who only knew her for a couple short months.
Yeah.
I also found it insulting that she seemed to be putting Trey on a bit of a pedestal and pretty much all but condones his behavior as Pfister's confessed murderer. It's a pretty awful book.
Yeah, well, I mean, she was the one that said that, she didn't need to be around anymore. So.
The fact that this woman is out walking around free just my mind. I mean, look, innocent till proven guilty or whatever, but this chick wasn't even, her husband cut a deal to get her off, whether she had anything to do with it or not. Which I personally, this is just my opinion, don't come at me, I don't care, but that shouldn't be a thing.
No.
If you think somebody played a role in somebody's murder, there should be no cutting a deal to let half of them go free.
Yeah, because he didn't do that by himself.
There's no way.
I mean, she was up the stairs, right?
Yeah, she was in the house. Also, there's no way he could have drug her body from the bed to the closet by himself.
Exactly.
She does go on to get a very small fraction of something against her. Not enough, but we'll talk about that right now.
Okay.
Also, I would like to say that everyone who knew Nancy Pfister, they did everything in their power to stop this book from being published. Fortunately, it was published. Styler also went on to be able to collect $1 million life insurance that was left behind by her husband after his death, who, by the way, she was in the middle of divorcing.
Oh, wow.
When he unalived himself.
Wow.
And that life insurance would be protected from debt collectors due to her having filed for bankruptcy. Luckily, in 2016, Juliana would challenge Nancy Styler, who at this point was going by her maiden name of Mason. She would challenge Styler's receiving of that money because at the time, Juliana had a wrongful death lawsuit against Styler for Pfister's murder, where she claimed that Nancy had to have played a role in it because Trey was in no physical condition to have fully acted alone.
Right.
Juliana was never made aware of the bankruptcy until after the lawsuit had been filed. The courts would agree with Juliana's argument and ordered Styler to pay back any and all money she had received from the life insurance, minus the $150,000 she used to pay the bankruptcy court. So, good for Juliana for pressing forward and doing her best to get as much justice for her mother as she could.
So she didn't get any of that money? Well, except for the...
Yeah, she got it, but she's got to pay it back.
Yeah.
And, I can't imagine being Juliana in this situation. You know what I mean? Like, having to go against somebody that you know participated.
Yeah.
In that.
I'm with you. I don't see how they could even make that deal, make that agreement. Because they know she had something to do with it. Now, Kathy, I honestly, this is just my opinion, I don't think she had anything to do with it. I just think she was in shock, and she was just... But Nancy, I think she probably did like 80% of it.
Well, I will say And I'm not saying that I think Kathy had anything to do with it or she didn't have anything to do with it. I will say, though, I didn't really hone in a lot of details about Kathy and Nancy Pfister's relationship over its course. But if I had, you would have seen or heard that Pfister and Carpenter had a lot of beef behind the curtains. Like, Pfister had caused Kathy to get into a lot of legal trouble and contributed to why she was going to those AA meetings. And like there was a lot of stuff that happened. Like they had a very on and off friendship.
Okay, well, let me take that back.
I'm not saying that she did or she didn't, because I do think she genuinely did love Nancy Pfister, and she really did, appreciate that relationship or certain aspects of that relationship. But I also think that there are parts of it that, Pfister at the end of the day wasn't very nice to anyone.
It didn't sound like it.
She just didn't treat anyone well. She was just kind of her own world, I guess. But that was the case for Nancy Pfister. And I will say, as I was just saying kind of a little bit about Kathy there is so much more to the story of Nancy Pfister and who she was and the life she lived. I will attach a link in the show notes for the book that I did use some for my resources or for my information. I didn't use all of it, but I did use some of it. Anyway, I'll attach a link for that in the show notes. I highly recommend this book. It's called Shadow on the Mountain, Nancy Pfister, Dr. William Styler, and the Murder of Aspen's Golden Girl. And it was written by Stephen and Joyce Singular, which the book was very, very well written. So if you're interested to learn more, please go check that out.
Okay.
So, and I will obviously attach the links to all the other resources that I used, as I do in all of the other episodes that we've ever posted. So if you're interested in more information outside of the book, those will be attached as well. But that is the life and tragic end of Nancy Pfister. I'm like you, though. Like, I feel like they had enough red flags to not move in at all.
Yeah.
And they also had enough red flags to, while she was still in Australia, to just leave. Yeah, so I feel like this whole thing was more like it snowballed on pride, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, after that $6,000 they gave her, and then she told them that they had to pay the cleaning lady, and then they had to pay for the alcohol, I would have been like, bye. Yeah, I think I would have just ate that $6,000 and just. I know that's easier said than done, and we weren't in their situation at the time, but it had to be a better route to take than what they ended up taking. Yeah. Like, they still were renting that temporary condo. Like, they still had their stuff in Denver somewhere. Like, even if they had to sleep in their car, their stuff was safe. Right. Like, there had to be a better alternative than. And I understand they were trying to get on their feet and they were broke or whatever. And I understand that Pfister was being a very difficult person to deal with. But that doesn't justify the end result, in my opinion. Sorry, I feel like I'm about to sneeze. I'm not making faces at you, I swear. What do you think about my opinion? But anyway, that is the case of Nancy Pfister. That was definitely interesting. I don't like the way that it turned out, but tragic, very tragic. Murder's never the answer, people. It's not the answer. Thank you guys for spending your time with us. If you could, if you're not too busy, if you like what we're doing and you like our content, if you could bebop on over to YouTube and give us a like, a subscribe, a share, or any of our other. Why are you laughing? Oh wait, this is going to be on YouTube. If you could just go straight down on the screen. Yeah.
if you could just go straight down on the screen and give us a like or a subscribe. Look how we cut that journey right in half for you. You're welcome. Look at us being generous. Anyway, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We love you guys for all your support, and we couldn't do what we do without you. So thank you.
Definitely appreciate it.
We are
Render the Darkness.
Ooh.